The world had a way of spinning a woman's plans like a weather vane in a tornado. And Aurora Anderson found herself standing ankle-deep in dust outside Tucson's Stagecoach station, staring down the barrel of the station master's indifference. Her wedding dress, carefully packed in her largest trunk, might as well have been made of gold for all the trouble it was causing her now. "I said no, Miss Anderson, and that's final," the station master declared, his jowls quivering beneath his salt and pepper mustache. "We're overbooked as it is. That trunk of yours would take the space of 2 paying customers. But I've purchased my ticket weeks ago. I'm to be married in Santa Fe in 5 days," Aurora protested, the Arizona sun beating down mercilessly on her cream-colored traveling bonnet. Sweat trickled down her neck, dampening the high collar of her dress. The year was 1878, and Aurora's life savings had gone into this journey and the wedding awaiting her at the end of it. "Not my concern, miss," the man replied, consulting his pocket watch with exaggerated importance. "The stage leaves in 10 minutes. You can board with a single carpetbag or not at all." Aurora glanced desperately at her trunk containing not just her wedding gown but nearly everything she owned in the world. She'd sold her parents' small ranch after their passing last winter, using most of the proceeds to secure her future with Harold Billington, her fiancé of 3 years who'd gone ahead to establish their new life in New Mexico territory. "This is impossible," she whispered, tears threatening to spill from her hazel eyes. "Problems with Parker again," came a deep voice from behind her. Aurora turned to find herself looking way up at a man astride a magnificent dapple gray stallion. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed black Stetson, but she could see the sun-bronzed skin of a man who lived his life outdoors. A faded red bandana was tied loosely around his neck, his chambray shirt open at the collar, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin. Dust clung to his denim trousers and well-worn boots, and a gun belt hung low on his hips. He was the very picture of a man who knew his way around the territory. "Vaughn," the station master spluttered, his earlier confidence visibly diminishing. "Just handling a booking issue. Stage is full today." The rider shifted in his saddle, and Aurora caught the glint of a silver star pinned to his leather vest. "Is that so?" Vaughn asked, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Seems the lady already has a ticket." "She's got too much luggage," Parker insisted, though with less conviction. "Rules are rules. Rules are rules when they suit you, Parker." The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, standing a head taller than both Aurora and the station master. He removed his hat, revealing eyes the color of a summer storm and dark hair that curled slightly at the edges from sweat and dust. "Miss?" he inquired gently. "Anderson." "Aurora Anderson," she replied, surprised at the steadiness in her voice despite her mounting distress. "Miss Anderson," he continued, replacing his hat and giving Parker a look that could have frozen the desert. "How urgent is your travel today?" "I'm to be married in Santa Fe in 5 days," she explained, a hint of desperation creeping into her voice. "I've sold everything to make this journey. My fiancé is expecting me." The man nodded once, decision made. "Parker, you'll send the lady's trunk on the next available stage. I'll make sure she reaches her destination." But the station master began. "That wasn't a request," Vaughn said simply, cutting off any protest. He turned to Aurora, and his stern expression softened slightly. "I'm headed to Santa Fe myself, Miss Anderson. If you're willing to trust a stranger, I can get you there in time for your wedding." Aurora hesitated, caught between impossible choices. Trust this unknown lawman or miss her own wedding? "I don't even know your name, sir." "Vaughn Lockhart, U.S. Marshal," he replied, tipping his hat slightly. "At your service, madam. A marshal. Relief washed over her. At least he wasn't some common outlaw or drifter. Yes, madam. Been riding this territory for 8 years now. Aurora glanced at the departing stagecoach, then back at her trunk, then finally to the imposing figure of Marshal Lockhart. What choice did she really have? Very well, Marshal. I accept your offer, she said, straightening her shoulders with as much dignity as she could muster. With a nod, Lockhart turned to the station master. Parker, I'll be checking that her trunk gets on the next stage. If it doesn't, we'll have words when I return. The station master paled slightly and nodded. Lockhart reached for Aurora's carpetbag. May I? She handed it over, watching as he secured it to his saddle with practiced ease. Then, in one swift motion that left her breathless, he placed his hands at her waist and lifted her onto the front of his saddle as if she weighed nothing at all. Hold on, he instructed, mounting behind her in a single fluid movement. Aurora found herself cradled against the hard wall of his chest, the unfamiliar closeness making her cheeks burn. His arms encircled her as he took the reins, creating a secure embrace that left her feeling both protected and uncomfortably aware of his proximity. Are you comfortable, Miss Anderson? He asked, his breath warm against her ear. As comfortable as circumstances allow, Marshal, she managed to reply, trying to maintain her composure despite the impropriety of their arrangement. Then we're off, he said, nudging his horse forward with a gentle pressure of his knees. Santa Fe awaits. As they rode away from the station, Aurora couldn't help but wonder what she had just committed herself to. 5 days alone on the trail with a man she'd just met, a handsome, imposing U.S. Marshal no less, headed toward her wedding to another man. The Arizona territory stretched vast and wild before them, promising an uncertain journey ahead. By late afternoon, the heat had become almost unbearable. Aurora's throat was parched, and she could feel the beginnings of a sunburn on her cheeks despite her bonnet. Marshal Lockhart had been mostly silent during their ride, speaking only to point out landmarks or to ask if she needed to rest. There's a creek just beyond that rise, he said, breaking a long silence. We'll stop there, give the horse a rest, and you can refresh yourself. Thank you, Aurora replied, her voice slightly hoarse from the dust and dryness. When they reached the creek, the marshal dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, but he released her immediately once her feet touched the ground, maintaining a respectful distance. Your legs might be a bit wobbly, he warned. Take a moment before walking. He was right. Having spent hours in the saddle, Aurora's legs felt like jelly beneath her. She swayed slightly, and Lockhart's hand shot out to steady her elbow. Thank you, she murmured, embarrassed by her weakness. While the marshal tended to his horse, Aurora made her way to the creek, grateful for the shade of the cottonwood trees that lined its banks. She knelt by the water, removed her gloves, and splashed the cool liquid on her face and neck, sighing with relief. Best not drink directly from the creek, Lockhart advised, approaching with a canteen. Here, use this. Aurora accepted the canteen gratefully, taking small sips as he'd instructed. You're very knowledgeable about traveling these parts, Marshal. Call me Vaughn, he said, settling on a rock nearby. We'll be traveling together for several days, no need for formalities. She hesitated. That wouldn't be proper. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Nothing about this situation is exactly proper, Miss Anderson. Aurora, she conceded. I suppose you're right, he nodded, seemingly pleased with the small victory. We'll rest here for about an hour, then push on until dusk. I know a place about 10 miles ahead where we can make camp for the night. Camp? Aurora hadn't considered the sleeping arrangements. Of course they would camp. What had she expected? Vaughn must have read the concern on her face. It's a small way station. Run by an elderly couple I know. You'll have your privacy." Relief washed over her. "I appreciate your consideration." "It's not just consideration," he replied, his expression turning serious. "A lady's reputation is no small matter, especially one who's traveling to meet her betrothed." Aurora studied him as he spoke, noticing the small scar that ran along his jawline, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings even as they conversed. There was something reassuring about his vigilance. "May I ask how you became a marshal?" she inquired, genuinely curious. He was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. "War changes a man," he finally said. "After Gettysburg, I couldn't go back to farming, needed something purposeful. You fought for the Union." "Yes, joined up in '62, straight from my father's farm in Pennsylvania." He offered no more details, and Aurora sensed he wasn't a man who spoke freely about those days. "My father lost his arm at Shiloh," she offered. "He never really recovered, though he lived until last winter." Vaughn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The war took something from all of us, one way or another." They fell into a companionable silence, the babbling of the creek and the occasional bird call the only sounds around them. Aurora found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crease between his brows that suggested he frowned more often than he smiled. "Your fiancé," Vaughn said suddenly, breaking the silence. "What's his profession?" "Harold is a banker," she replied, a small smile touching her lips as she thought of her soon-to-be husband. "He moved to Santa Fe 6 months ago to help establish a new branch of the Territorial Bank." "A banker," Vaughn repeated, something unreadable in his tone. "A stable profession." "Yes, very stable," Aurora agreed. "That's partly why I agreed to marry him. After my parents' passing, stability became important." Vaughn's gaze met hers, and for a moment she felt as though he could see right through her carefully constructed explanations to the truth beneath that her engagement to Harold had been born more of pragmatism than passion. But the moment passed, and he stood, adjusting his hat. "We should move on," he said. "Want to make good time before dark." As they continued their journey, Aurora found herself increasingly aware of the man behind her. The solid warmth of his chest against her back, the strength in his arms as he guided the horse, the faint scent of leather, and something distinctly masculine that surrounded him. It was disconcerting, this forced intimacy with a stranger, especially one who unsettled her in ways she couldn't quite explain. By the time they reached the way station Vaughn had mentioned, the sun was sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The station itself was little more than a small adobe building with a stable attached, but to Aurora's tired eyes it looked like a palace. An elderly couple greeted them warmly, clearly familiar with Vaughn. The woman, who introduced herself as Martha, led Aurora inside while Vaughn stayed to tend to his horse. "Been a while since we've had a lady visitor," Martha said kindly, showing Aurora to a small but clean room. "Marshal Lockhart says you're headed to your wedding." "Yes," Aurora confirmed, removing her bonnet with relief. "In Santa Fe," Martha nodded approvingly. "The Marshal's a good man to help you. Not many would go out of their way like that." "I'm very grateful," Aurora said sincerely. "I don't know what I would have done otherwise." "Well, you get yourself washed up. Dinner's near ready, and you look like you could use a hot meal." Left alone, Aurora quickly freshened up, washing away the dust of the trail as best she could with the basin of water Martha had provided. She changed into her second-best dress, a simple blue cotton garment that was wrinkled from being in her carpet bag, but was at least clean. When she emerged, she found Vaughn seated at a rough-hewn table, deep in conversation with Martha's husband, Elijah. He'd removed his hat and gun belt and had clearly washed up as well. His dark hair was damp at the edges, and without the shadow of his hat, his features were even more striking than she'd initially realized. He stood when she entered the room, a gesture of respect that surprised her slightly. "Miss Anderson," he acknowledged with a nod. "Marshal," she returned, suddenly self-conscious under his steady gaze. Martha bustled in with a steaming pot of stew, breaking the moment. "Sit, sit. Both of you must be starving." The meal was simple but delicious venison stew, fresh bread, and preserved peaches for dessert. Conversation flowed easily, with Elijah sharing news of the territory and Vaughn occasionally adding his own observations. Aurora found herself relaxing, almost forgetting the unusual circumstances that had brought her to this table. After dinner, Martha insisted on showing Aurora some quilts she'd been working on, while Vaughn and Elijah stepped outside to smoke. When Aurora finally retired to her room, exhaustion hit her like a physical force. She barely managed to change into her nightgown before collapsing onto the narrow bed. Despite her fatigue, sleep proved elusive. Her mind kept returning to the day's events, to the strange twist of fate that had placed her in the care of Marshal Vaughn Lockhart. He was nothing like Harold, where her fiancé was refined, educated, and meticulous. Vaughn was rugged, direct, and seemed to operate on instinct rather than careful planning. Yet there was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that made her feel secure despite the dangers of their journey. It was a foolish train of thought, she knew. In 5 days, she would be Mrs. Harold Billington, living a respectable life in Santa Fe, far from the dust and danger of the trail. That was the future she had chosen, the one that made sense. With that firm reminder, Aurora finally drifted off to sleep, the distant sound of coyotes harmonizing with the desert wind. The second day of their journey dawned clear and cool, a welcome change from the previous day's heat. Aurora woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and the low murmur of voices from the main room of the way station. She dressed quickly in her riding clothes, a practical brown skirt and white blouse, and braided her long auburn hair before pinning it up under her bonnet. When she emerged, she found Vaughn already at the table, discussing their route with Elijah over a map spread between them. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy as both men looked up at her entrance. "Morning, Miss Anderson," Vaughn replied, standing. "I trust you slept well." "Better than I expected to," she admitted. "And you?" "Well enough." He rolled up the map and tucked it into his saddlebag. "We should get an early start. Got a lot of ground to cover today." Martha provided them with a hearty breakfast and packed them food for the journey: bread, cheese, dried beef, and apples. Aurora tried to pay her, but the woman waved away her offer. "Any friend of the Marshals is a friend of ours," she insisted. "Just be safe, and God bless your marriage, dear." Aurora thanked her warmly, touched by the woman's kindness. Outside, Vaughn had already saddled his horse and secured their belongings. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to help her mount. Aurora nodded, placing her hand in his and allowing him to lift her onto the saddle. She was more prepared today for the proximity their travel required, but still felt a flutter of nerves as he mounted behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. They bid farewell to Martha and Elijah, then set off into the cool morning air. The terrain gradually changed as they rode, the flat desert giving way to more rugged country with scattered pine and juniper. Vaughn explained they would be climbing into higher elevations before descending again toward Santa Fe. "It's beautiful," Aurora remarked, admiring the landscape. "Different from what I'm used to around Tucson. The territory has more faces than most people ever see," Vaughn replied, "each one with its own kind of beauty." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait almost hypnotic. Eventually, Aurora's curiosity got the better of her. "What takes you to Santa Fe, Marshal, if you don't mind my asking?" There was a slight hesitation before he answered. "Official business, transporting a prisoner." Aurora twisted slightly to look at him. "A prisoner, but you're traveling alone." "I'm meeting a colleague who has him in custody. We'll escort him to the territorial prison together." "Is he dangerous?" she asked, a hint of worry in her voice. "All men are dangerous in the right circumstances," Vaughn replied cryptically. "But you needn't worry. Our paths will only cross briefly in Santa Fe." Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Aurora didn't press. Everyone had their secrets after all. They stopped at midday to rest and eat beside a small stream. Vaughn helped her down from the horse, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Aurora was becoming uncomfortably aware of his touch, of the way her heart seemed to beat just a little faster when he was near. "Tell me about your fiancé," Vaughn said as they sat in the shade of a juniper tree, sharing the food Martha had packed. The question caught Aurora off guard. "Harold, what would you like to know?" Vaughn shrugged, taking a bite of his apple. "How did you meet? How long have you known each other?" "We met at a church social 4 years ago," Aurora replied, her mind drifting back to that day. "He had just moved to Tucson from Boston to work at the bank. He was so different from the local men, well-spoken, educated, refined." "And that appealed to you?" Aurora considered the question. "I suppose it did. My father was ill by then, and we were struggling to maintain the ranch. Harold represented a different kind of life, one with fewer hardships. So it was a practical decision," Vaughn observed, his gray eyes studying her. "Not entirely," Aurora protested, though there was more truth in his words than she cared to admit. "Harold is a good man, kind, responsible. We share similar values. And he loves you." "Of course," she said automatically, but the question lingered in her mind. Did Harold love her truly? He had never been demonstrative with his affections, never spoke of passion or deep feeling. Their courtship had been proper, restrained, conducted largely under the watchful eyes of her parents or other chaperones. "And you love him?" Vaughn's voice was quiet, almost gentle. Aurora met his gaze, finding no judgment there, only genuine curiosity. "I respect and admire him greatly," she answered carefully. "Love comes in many forms, doesn't it? Not all of them are the wild, passionate kind found in novels." Vaughn held her gaze for a long moment, then looked away. "Yes, I suppose it does." They finished their meal in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As Vaughn packed up their things, Aurora found herself watching him, the confident movements of his hands, the breadth of his shoulders, the way the sun caught in his dark hair. He was so different from Harold, so much a creature of this wild country, at home in its harshness in a way her fiancé would never be back on the trail. Aurora tried to banish such comparisons from her mind. It wasn't fair to Harold, who had offered her security and respect when she needed it most. And it certainly wasn't appropriate to be thinking of another man in such a way, especially so close to her wedding day. Yet as the hours passed, with Vaughn's solid presence behind her and the vast landscape unfolding before them, Aurora couldn't help but wonder if she was making the right choice. Was security enough of a foundation for a lifetime together? Had she been too hasty in accepting Harold's proposal, too frightened of an uncertain future to consider what she truly wanted? The sun was beginning its descent when Vaughn suddenly tensed behind her, his arms tightening slightly around her. "What is it?" she whispered, instantly alert to the change in him. "Riders," he murmured, his voice low near her ear. "Coming up fast behind us." Aurora's heart began to race. "Bandits, maybe." He guided his horse off the trail into a cluster of rocks and trees that offered some cover. "Stay quiet." They waited, Vaughn's hand resting on his holstered pistol. Soon Aurora could hear the approaching hoofbeats growing louder by the second. 3 riders appeared on the trail, moving at a gallop. They slowed as they neared the spot where Vaughn and Aurora had left the trail, clearly noticing the fresh tracks. "They're looking for someone," Vaughn whispered. "Could be us, could be someone else." The riders conferred briefly, then split up, one continuing down the trail while 2 others began to search the surrounding area. Aurora's breath caught as one of them headed in their direction. Vaughn quietly drew his pistol. "If there's trouble, I want you to take the horse and ride hard for the next town. It's about 5 miles ahead. Ask for Sheriff Clayton." "I'm not leaving you," Aurora protested in a whisper. Before Vaughn could respond, the rider spotted them. "Over here." He called to his companion, drawing his gun. "U.S. Marshal," Vaughn called out, his voice carrying authority. "State your business." The rider hesitated, clearly not expecting to confront a lawman. His companion rode up beside him, equally wary. "We're looking for a woman," the first man called back. "Redhead, traveling alone. Seen anyone matching that description?" Aurora felt Vaughn's body relax slightly behind her. "Haven't seen any woman traveling alone," he replied truthfully. "Not safe in these parts." The men exchanged glances. "Mind if we see who you've got with you there, Marshal?" "I do mind," Vaughn said firmly. "My companion is a lady traveling under my protection to her wedding in Santa Fe. I'd appreciate you moving along and continuing your search elsewhere." The second man, older and with a weathered face that had seen its share of violence, studied them carefully. "No offense meant, Marshal. We're just doing a job. Girl we're looking for stole something valuable from our employer." "And who might your employer be?" Vaughn asked, his tone conversational but his body still tense for action. "Mr. James Blackwood of Tucson," the man replied. "Perhaps you've heard of him." Aurora stiffened at the name. Blackwood was a notorious businessman in Tucson, rumored to be involved in everything from gambling to extortion. She'd never had any dealings with him herself, but everyone knew his reputation. "Can't say that I have," Vaughn lied smoothly, "but I'll keep an eye out for your redhead. Now, if you'll excuse us, we've got a long ride ahead." The men hesitated, clearly weighing their options. Taking on a U.S. Marshal wasn't a decision to make lightly, even if they outnumbered him. "Fair enough, Marshal," the older man finally said. "Sorry to have troubled you and the lady." They tipped their hats and rode back to the trail, rejoining their companion who had returned from scouting ahead. The 3 conferred briefly, then continued down the path, away from Vaughn and Aurora. "Are they really gone?" Aurora whispered after a few minutes of silence. "Let's wait a bit longer to be sure," Vaughn replied, holstering his weapon. "They could be setting up an ambush ahead." They remained hidden for nearly 30 minutes before Vaughn deemed it safe to continue. As they returned to the trail, Aurora couldn't help but ask, "Do you think they were really looking for a red-headed woman, or was that just a pretext?" "Hard to say," Vaughn answered thoughtfully. "But Blackwood isn't a man who sends his men chasing after petty thieves. If they are looking for someone, she must have taken something very valuable indeed." "You know of Blackwood, then?" "You said you didn't." "Never met the man, but I know his reputation. He's been on the Marshal Service's radar for some time. Just nothing we've been able to prove in court." They rode in silence for a while, both more alert after the encounter. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the trail. "We'll need to find a place to camp soon," Vaughn said. "There's no way station nearby, I'm afraid." Aurora nodded, trying not to show her apprehension. She'd never slept outdoors before, had always had the security of 4 walls and a roof. "I know a spot about a mile ahead," Vaughn continued. "Defensible position, fresh water nearby. You think those men might come back?" Aurora asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "Doubtful, but in this territory, it's always better to be cautious." When they reached the campsite Vaughn had mentioned, Aurora had to admit it was well chosen. A rocky outcropping provided shelter on one side, while a clear view of the surrounding area would make it difficult for anyone to approach unnoticed. A small spring bubbled up nearby, providing fresh water. Vaughn helped her dismount, then began efficiently setting up camp. He gathered wood for a fire, unsaddled and tended to his horse and unpacked their supplies. Aurora, determined not to be useless, offered to prepare their meal. "I may not be experienced with camping," she said with a small smile, "but I do know how to cook." Vaughn returned her smile, the first genuine one she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and lighting his gray eyes. "That would be much appreciated, Miss Anderson. My cooking skills are limited." As darkness fell, they sat by the fire, eating the simple meal Aurora had prepared from their provisions. The night was cool, stars appearing one by one in the vast sky above them. "It's beautiful," Aurora murmured, gazing upward. "I've never seen so many stars." "One of the benefits of being far from city lights," Vaughn agreed, following her gaze. "Makes a man feel small looking up at all that." "But not in a bad way," Aurora mused. "More like a reminder that our problems aren't as big as they seem." Vaughn studied her across the fire, his expression thoughtful. "That's a wise perspective." They fell into companionable silence, the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a coyote the only sounds disturbing the night. Aurora found herself surprisingly comfortable in Vaughn's presence, despite the unusual circumstances of their acquaintance. "I'll take the first watch," Vaughn said eventually, breaking the silence. "You should get some sleep. I've laid out your bedroll under the overhang there." Aurora hesitated. "You're not going to sleep. I'll wake you in a few hours, then get some rest myself," he assured her. "Just a precaution." Nodding, Aurora rose and made her way to the bedroll he'd prepared. It wasn't the most comfortable arrangement, but her exhaustion from the long day's ride would likely overcome any discomfort. "Good night, Marshal," she said softly. "Good night, Miss Anderson," he replied, his eyes catching the firelight as he watched her settle in. "Sleep well." Despite her fatigue, Aurora lay awake for some time, watching Vaughn's silhouette against the night sky as he kept vigil. There was something deeply reassuring about his presence, about knowing he was watching over her while she slept. It occurred to her that she had never felt this protected with Harold, never experienced this sense of absolute security in his company. The thought troubled her as she finally drifted off to sleep, the gentle murmur of the spring and the occasional shifting of coals in the fire following her into dreams. Aurora woke to the gentle touch of Vaughn's hand on her shoulder. The sky was still dark, stars wheeling overhead, but the moon had risen high, casting silvery light across the landscape. "Your turn to keep watch," he said softly as she blinked up at him. "Sorry to wake you." "It's all right," she murmured, sitting up and rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "What time is it?" "Just past midnight, I reckon." He handed her his pistol. "Ever used one of these?" Aurora hesitated before taking the weapon. "My father taught me the basics after the war, said a woman alone should know how to protect herself." Vaughn nodded approvingly. "Smart man, your father. Just keep your eyes and ears open. Wake me if you hear or see anything unusual." "I will," she promised, surprised by the trust he was placing in her. As Vaughn settled onto his own bedroll, Aurora moved to sit by the fire, which had burned down to glowing embers. She added a small log, careful not to create too much smoke or light that might attract unwanted attention. The night was peaceful, a gentle breeze stirring the junipers and carrying the sweet scent of sage. Aurora found herself studying Vaughn as he slept, his features relaxed in a way they never were when he was awake. He looked younger, the lines of vigilance and responsibility temporarily erased from his face. What kind of life did a U.S. Marshal lead? Always on the move, always alert for danger, never truly at rest. It seemed a lonely existence, so different from the settled, predictable life she was heading toward with Harold. As if sensing her thoughts, Vaughn stirred in his sleep, his brow furrowing slightly before smoothing out again. Aurora looked away, feeling as though she'd intruded on something private. The hours passed slowly, but Aurora didn't mind. There was a strange beauty to this solitary watch, to being the only one awake in the vast wilderness. She felt more alive, more aware of herself and her surroundings than she had in years. When the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, Vaughn woke without being called, sitting up and immediately scanning their surroundings. "All quiet?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep. "Yes," Aurora replied, returning his pistol. "Not even a coyote." He nodded, accepting the weapon and holstering it. "You did well. Most people find their first night watch unnerving." "I rather enjoyed it," she admitted. "There's something clarifying about being alone with your thoughts in the quiet." Vaughn studied her for a moment, a curious expression on his face. "You're not what I expected, Aurora Anderson." "Is that a compliment or a criticism?" she asked, smiling slightly. "Definitely a compliment," he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting in a half-smile. "Not many women would handle this journey with such grace." Aurora felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected praise. Necessity is a powerful motivator. They broke camp efficiently, sharing a quick breakfast before continuing their journey. The terrain grew more challenging as they ascended into the foothills, the trail narrowing and occasionally disappearing altogether. Vaughn navigated confidently, clearly familiar with the route. By midday, they had climbed high enough that Aurora could see for miles in every direction, the landscape spread out below them like a living map. The beauty of it took her breath away. "We'll reach the pass by sunset," Vaughn informed her as they paused to rest the horse. "There's a small settlement on the other side where we can spend the night. From there, it's a day and a half to Santa Fe." Aurora felt a strange pang at the reminder that their journey was more than half over. Despite the dangers and discomforts, there was something exhilarating about this adventure, something she hadn't experienced in her careful, constrained life in Tucson. "Will you return to Tucson after your business in Santa Fe?" she asked, watching his profile as he surveyed the trail ahead. "Eventually," he replied. "My jurisdiction covers most of the territory. I go where I'm needed. It must be difficult having no real home." Vaughn turned to look at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "The trail is my home, Miss Anderson, has been for a long time." "Don't you ever wish for something more permanent?" she pressed, genuinely curious. "A place to return to, people who know you're coming back." He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "There was a time when I thought about settling down. After the war, I met a woman in Denver. Mary was her name. We talked about a future together." "What happened?" Aurora asked softly, surprised he was sharing something so personal. "She died," he said simply. "Cholera outbreak in '70. After that, well, the badge became my life." "I'm sorry," Aurora said, reaching out impulsively to touch his arm. "Truly." Vaughn looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then back to her face. "It was a long time ago," he said, but she could see the shadow of old pain in his eyes. They continued their journey in thoughtful silence, the horse picking its way carefully along the ascending trail. Aurora found herself thinking about Vaughn's loss, about how a single event could alter the course of a life so completely. Had her decision to marry Harold been similarly shaped by the death of her parents, the fear of facing an uncertain future alone? As the day wore on, the trail became increasingly treacherous. In some places, it was barely wide enough for the horse, with a sheer drop on one side and the mountain wall on the other. Aurora found herself holding her breath as they navigated these sections, grateful for Vaughn's steady presence behind her and his horse's sure footing. They were traversing one such narrow passage when disaster struck. A small rock slide, perhaps triggered by their passing, suddenly cascaded down from above. The horse reared in panic, nearly sending them both over the edge. Vaughn reacted instantly, one arm tightening around Aurora's waist while the other fought to control the frightened animal. For a heart-stopping moment, Aurora felt herself slipping from the saddle, the chasm below yawning like a hungry mouth. Then Vaughn's arm clamped around her like an iron band, pulling her back against his chest as he somehow managed to calm the horse. "Are you all right?" he demanded, his voice tight with concern. Aurora could only nod, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. They remained motionless for several seconds, both breathing heavily, Vaughn's arm still locked around her waist. "Thank you," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Vaughn's breath was warm against her neck. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of danger." Indeed, the trail ahead was now partially blocked by fallen rocks, leaving an even narrower passage. Vaughn assessed the situation quickly. "We'll have to go on foot," he decided. "Lead the horse between us." He dismounted first, then helped Aurora down. The ledge was so narrow she had to press herself against the mountain wall to stay balanced. Vaughn handed her the reins, then positioned himself between the horse and the drop-off. "Slowly now," he instructed. "One step at a time." They inched forward, the horse snorting nervously between them. Aurora could feel her palms sweating against the leather reins, her heart still racing from their near fall. One misstep, one more small rock slide, and they could all go over the edge. The passage seemed to stretch endlessly, though in reality it was probably no more than 50 yards. When they finally reached wider ground, Aurora's legs were trembling with tension and relief. Vaughn took the reins from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. "You did well," he said quietly. "Many would have panicked." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Being brave isn't about not feeling fear," he replied, his eyes holding hers. "It's about doing what needs to be done despite the fear." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of shared courage, of mutual respect that transcended their brief acquaintance. Aurora felt it like a physical thing, a connection forming that she hadn't anticipated and wasn't sure she welcomed. They continued on foot for a while longer, leading the horse until the trail widened enough to safely ride again. By then, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. "The settlement is just beyond the pass," Vaughn said as they remounted, Aurora once again cradled against his chest. "We should reach it before full dark." True to his word, they crested the pass as the last light was fading from the sky. Below them, nestled in a small valley, Aurora could see the warm glow of lanterns and fires from a cluster of buildings. "What is this place?" she asked as they began their descent. "Eagle's Rest," Vaughn replied. "Started as a mining camp about 10 years ago. Silver played out quickly, but a few families stayed on. They get by on hunting, trapping, and providing shelter to travelers like us." The settlement was indeed small, perhaps 20 buildings altogether, most of them simple log cabins. A larger structure with a sign announcing it as the Miners' Rest appeared to serve as a combined general store, saloon, and inn. As they rode in, A few curious faces appeared in doorways and windows, eyeing the newcomers with interest. It had likely been some time since a woman had passed through. Judging by the surprised expressions, Aurora noted on several weathered faces. Vaughn guided his horse to a small stable attached to the inn, where a boy of about 16 came out to greet them. "Evening, Marshal Lockhart," the boy said, his face lighting up with recognition. "Pa said you might be coming through." "Evening, Caleb," Vaughn replied, dismounting before helping Aurora down. "Horse could use a good rub-down and some grain. We've had a rough trail today." "Yes, sir." "I'll take good care of him," the boy promised, eyeing Aurora curiously but too polite to stare. "Miss Anderson, this is Caleb Turner. His father runs the inn," Vaughn explained. "Caleb, Miss Anderson is traveling to Santa Fe for her wedding. She'll need your mother's best room tonight." "Yes, sir," Caleb repeated, looking slightly awed now. "Ma's inside. She'll be right pleased to have a lady guest." The inn was rustic but clean, the main room serving as both dining area and saloon. Several men sat at tables or at the small bar, all turning to look as Vaughn and Aurora entered. The conversation dimmed momentarily, then resumed at a lower volume, punctuated by curious glances. A tall, lean man with graying hair approached them, hand extended. "Marshal Lockhart, good to see you again." "Likewise, Samuel," Vaughn replied, shaking the offered hand. "This is Miss Aurora Anderson. She's traveling under my protection to Santa Fe." Samuel Turner bowed slightly to Aurora. "Madam, welcome to Eagle's Rest. My wife, Martha, will be delighted to have another woman to talk to. Place can get a mite lonely for womenfolk." As if summoned by her name, a plump, pleasant-faced woman emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face brightened at the sight of Aurora. "Oh my, a visitor!" she exclaimed, hurrying forward. "And a lady visitor at that." "Samuel, why didn't you call me right away?" "Just did, Martha, by not calling you," Samuel replied with fond exasperation. "Miss Anderson, my wife Martha. Martha, Miss Anderson is traveling to Santa Fe for her wedding." "A bride?" Martha clasped her hands together in delight. "Oh, we must get you settled right away. You look exhausted, you poor dear. Samuel, have Caleb bring hot water for a bath, and check if any of my dresses might fit Miss Anderson. She'll want something fresh to wear." Before Aurora could protest that her remaining clothing, while wrinkled, was perfectly adequate, Martha had taken her arm and was leading her toward a staircase at the back of the room. "You men talk your business," she called over her shoulder. "I'll take care of our bride-to-be." Aurora glanced back at Vaughn, who gave her a reassuring nod before turning to speak with Samuel. She allowed herself to be led upstairs to a small but comfortable room, where Martha fussed over her like a mother hen. True to Samuel's word, a hot bath was soon arranged, and Aurora found herself soaking gratefully in the steaming water, the aches and dust of 3 days' hard travel washing away. Martha had indeed found a dress that would fit her, a simple blue calico that was a touch too large but clean and presentable. "Marshal Lockhart's a good man," Martha commented as she helped Aurora comb out her long auburn hair later. "One of the best. Been coming through Eagle's Rest for years now. Always brings news and mail from the larger settlements." "He's been very kind," Aurora agreed carefully, mindful of propriety. Martha's eyes twinkled knowingly. "And handsome too, though I suspect you've noticed that, bride-to-be or not." Aurora felt her cheeks flush. "Mrs. Turner, I assure you—" "Oh, don't you worry, dear," Martha chuckled. "I'm just teasing. Though I will say, if I were 20 years younger and not happily married to Samuel, I might set my cap for the Marshal myself." Aurora couldn't help but laugh at the woman's frankness. It felt good to be in female company again, to engage in the kind of light-hearted conversation she'd missed since leaving Tucson. When they returned downstairs, they found Vaughn and Samuel seated at a table, deep in conversation that ceased abruptly when the women approached. Aurora caught a fleeting expression of concern on Vaughn's face before it was replaced by his usual composed look. "Miss Anderson," he said, standing as she approached. "I trust you're feeling refreshed." "Very much so," she replied, noticing how his eyes lingered briefly on her borrowed dress and loosely braided hair. "Mrs. Turner has been most kind." "Nonsense," Martha said cheerfully. "Now, both of you must be starving. I've got venison stew and fresh bread, and Samuel even opened a jar of my special preserved peaches for dessert." The meal was delicious, the conversation pleasant as Samuel and Martha shared news and gossip from the settlement and surrounding area. Aurora found herself relaxing, almost forgetting the purpose of her journey and the man who waited for her in Santa Fe. After dinner, several of the local men produced instruments: a fiddle, a harmonica, and a well-worn guitar, and began to play. The music was lively, filling the small inn with warmth and life. "Would you care to dance, Miss Anderson?" Vaughn asked unexpectedly, standing and offering his hand. Aurora hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I'd be delighted, Marshal." He led her to a small open area where a few other couples were already moving to the music. His hand settled at her waist, firm but respectful, while his other clasped hers. As they began to dance, Aurora was surprised by how gracefully he moved for such a big man. "You dance well, Marshal," she commented, looking up at him. "My mother insisted all her sons learn," he replied, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Said no boy of hers would grow up to be a clumsy oaf at social gatherings. She sounds like a formidable woman." "She was," he agreed, a fond smile softening his features. "Raised 5 boys on a Pennsylvania farm while my father fought in the Mexican War. Never complained, never faltered." "You admire her greatly," Aurora observed. "I do. She taught me that strength isn't just about physical power. It's about endurance, about facing whatever comes with courage and dignity." His eyes held hers as they turned to the music. "Reminds me of someone else I've come to know." Aurora felt her breath catch at the unexpected compliment. "Marshal Lockhart, Vaughn," he corrected gently. "After all we've been through, I think we can dispense with formalities, at least for tonight." "Vaughn," she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on her lips. They continued to dance, the music slowing to a more sedate tempo. Aurora was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, of the scant inches separating them, of the warmth in his gray eyes as they moved together. "Aurora," he said quietly, her name almost a caress. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you certain about this marriage, truly certain?" The question caught her off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. There had been a tension building between them since their first meeting, an unspoken connection that neither had acknowledged. "Why do you ask?" she countered, not ready to examine her own feelings too closely. "Because I've watched you these past days," he replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I've seen how you face challenges, how you adapt to difficulty with grace and courage. And I wonder if a man who hasn't witnessed these qualities in you can truly appreciate the woman you are." Aurora felt as though the room had suddenly emptied, leaving just the two of them moving slowly to the music. "You speak as though you know me well, but we've only just met." Sometimes a few days on the trail reveals more about a person than years of polite conversation in drawing rooms, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've seen your true character, Aurora. Have you shown it to him?" The question struck at the heart of her doubts, at the growing realization that Harold knew only the version of herself she had carefully presented: demure, agreeable, never challenging or surprising. He had never seen her shoot a pistol, or keep watch through the night, or face danger with steady nerves. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "Perhaps not." The music ended, but they remained standing close together, the moment stretching between them like a fragile thread. Then someone called for Vaughn from across the room, breaking the spell. "Marshal, got a man here, says he needs to speak with you, says it's urgent." Vaughn's expression shifted instantly from warmth to alertness. "Excuse me," he said to Aurora, stepping back with reluctance. "I should see what this is about." Aurora nodded, watching as he crossed the room to where Samuel stood with a dust-covered stranger. The three men conferred in low voices, their expressions growing increasingly serious. Finally, Vaughn nodded and the stranger departed, while Vaughn returned to Aurora's side. "Is everything all right?" she asked, noting the tension in his jaw. "There's been a change of plans," he said, his voice controlled but with an undercurrent of concern. "We need to leave at first light tomorrow. There's word of trouble ahead on our planned route." "What kind of trouble?" Vaughn hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell her. "The men we encountered yesterday, Blackwood's men. They've been spotted again, this time with reinforcements. They're watching the main trails to Santa Fe." Aurora felt a chill run through her. "They're looking for us." "I'm not sure," Vaughn admitted, "but I'm not willing to take chances with your safety. We'll take an alternate route, less traveled but also less likely to be watched." "Will we still reach Santa Fe in time?" "If we push hard, yes. It will mean longer days in the saddle and rougher camping, but we should make it the day before your wedding." Aurora nodded, trusting his judgment. "Then that's what we'll do." Vaughn studied her face for a moment, as if searching for signs of fear or hesitation. Finding none, he offered a small smile. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Anderson." "Good," she replied with more confidence than she felt. "I'd hate to become predictable." The evening ended soon after, the settlers retiring to their homes and the few travelers to their rooms. As Martha showed Aurora to her quarters, the older woman gave her a knowing look. "That Marshal looks at you like you hung the moon, dear," she said kindly. "Just something to think about before you say your vows to another man." Before Aurora could formulate a response, Martha patted her hand and departed, leaving her alone with her tumultuous thoughts. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams a confused mixture of weddings and gunfights, of Harold's disapproving face and Vaughn's strong hands lifting her onto his saddle. When she woke before dawn to Vaughn's soft knock at her door, she felt less rested than she'd hoped. They departed Eagle's Rest as the first gray light of dawn was breaking over the mountains. Martha had packed them provisions for the journey, and Samuel had provided Vaughn with detailed directions for their alternate route. The settlement's few inhabitants gathered to see them off, offering good wishes for Aurora's wedding and safe passage for them both. As they rode away, following a narrow trail that wound through dense pine forest, Aurora found herself clinging to the memory of the previous night's warmth and music. The path ahead seemed suddenly fraught with uncertainty, and not just because of the physical dangers they might face. The day's journey was indeed more arduous than their previous travel. The trail was often barely discernible, requiring Vaughn to dismount frequently to scout ahead or clear obstacles. They forded two small but swift-flowing streams, the cold water soaking Aurora to the knees despite Vaughn's careful guidance. By midday, they had made less progress than hoped, and Vaughn's expression grew increasingly grim as he consulted his map. "We need to make better time," he said as they paused for a brief rest. "At this rate, we won't reach Santa Fe until the day of your wedding, leaving no margin for delays." "We'll manage," Aurora assured him, though her own concern was growing. The thought of arriving in Santa Fe disheveled and exhausted with barely time to prepare for her wedding was disheartening. They pressed on, the terrain gradually becoming less densely forested and more rocky. By late afternoon, they had emerged onto a high plateau that offered sweeping views in all directions. Vaughn reined in his horse, scanning the landscape with narrowed eyes. "There," he said, pointing to a distant plume of dust. "Riders moving fast. Hard to tell from this distance, but could be 6 or 7 men." Aurora felt her heart begin to race. "Blackwood's men, can't be sure," Vaughn replied, his voice tight. "But they're heading in the same direction we are, and that's not a good sign." He urged his horse forward, pushing for greater speed despite the animal's obvious fatigue. They rode hard for the remainder of the day, stopping only when absolutely necessary to rest the horse or consult the map. As dusk approached, Vaughn led them into a narrow canyon, following a small stream that wound between towering rock walls. "We'll camp here tonight," he decided, dismounting and helping Aurora down. "The canyon provides good cover, and there's only one approach to watch." They made camp quickly, foregoing a fire despite the growing chill. Vaughn shared their remaining food: dried beef, hard biscuits, and the last of Martha's preserved peaches, then settled with his back against a boulder, rifle across his knees. "You should try to sleep," he told Aurora. "Tomorrow will be another long day." She nodded, too exhausted to argue, and wrapped herself in the blanket he offered. But despite her fatigue, sleep eluded her. The hard ground beneath her, the constant murmur of the stream, and her own anxious thoughts conspired to keep her awake. After an hour of restless turning, she sat up to find Vaughn still alert, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond their camp. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. "No," she admitted, moving to sit beside him. "Too many thoughts." He offered her a sip from his canteen, which she accepted gratefully. "Want to share those thoughts?" Aurora was quiet for a moment, gathering her courage. "I keep thinking about what you said last night, about whether Harold truly knows me." Vaughn remained silent, giving her space to continue. "The truth is, I'm not sure he does," she said slowly. "Our courtship was so proper. Chaperoned visits, polite conversation, nothing like—" She gestured vaguely at their surroundings, at the wild beauty of the canyon and the vast, star-filled sky above. "Nothing like this," Vaughn finished for her. "No," she agreed. "Nothing like this. Nothing like facing danger together, or keeping watch through the night, or—" She hesitated, then plunged ahead, "or dancing as if no one else existed." Vaughn's eyes held hers in the darkness. "Aurora," he said, his voice rough with some contained emotion. "I have no right to interfere in your plans. You made a commitment to this man, and I respect that." "But," she prompted, sensing there was more. "But I can't help wondering if you're marrying him for the right reasons," he continued. "Security is important, yes. Stability matters. But there are other things that matter too, such as trust, understanding, knowing someone sees you for who you truly are and values that person." He paused, his voice dropping lower. "Feeling alive when you're with them." Aurora's heart pounded in her chest. "And if those things are missing—" "What then?" "Then you have a choice to make," he said simply. "A hard one with no guarantees either way." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them. Finally, Aurora spoke. "We should both try to get some rest," she said, unable to face the decision his words demanded, "at least not tonight." "As you said, tomorrow will be a long day." Vaughn nodded, accepting her retreat. "I'll wake you if there's any trouble." Aurora returned to her bedroll, but sleep remained elusive. Her mind circled endlessly around the choice that loomed before her, a choice that seemed increasingly unavoidable with every mile that brought them closer to Santa Fe. Dawn broke with a cold gray light that matched Aurora's troubled mood. They ate a sparse breakfast in silence, both aware of the tensions that had surfaced the night before. As they prepared to depart, Vaughn suddenly froze, his hand going to his pistol. "You hear that?" he whispered. Aurora listened, at first hearing nothing but the gentle gurgle of the stream and the morning calls of birds. Then she caught the distant sound of hoofbeats, growing steadily louder. "Riders coming up the canyon," Vaughn confirmed grimly. "No time to run, we'll have to stand our ground." He led his horse deeper into a cluster of boulders, motioning for Aurora to follow. Pulling his rifle from its scabbard, he positioned himself where he had a clear view of the canyon's entrance while remaining mostly concealed. "Stay behind me," he instructed, his voice calm but authoritative. "If shooting starts, get down and stay down." Aurora nodded, her mouth dry with fear but her mind surprisingly clear. The hoofbeats grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls until it seemed they were surrounded by an army rather than what was likely just a few riders. When the first horseman appeared at the mouth of the canyon, Vaughn tensed beside her. 3 more followed, all armed, all scanning the canyon with the wary alertness of men expecting trouble. "It's them," Vaughn murmured. "Blackwood's men from yesterday plus 2 more. What do they want?" Aurora whispered back. "We're about to find out," he replied as the lead rider raised his hand, signaling the others to halt. "Marshal Lockhart," the man called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "We know you're in there. Show yourself." Vaughn exchanged a quick glance with Aurora, then called back. "State your business." "Just want to talk, Marshal. No need for things to get unfriendly." After a moment's consideration, Vaughn stepped partially out from behind the boulders, rifle ready but not aimed directly at the men. "Talk then." The lead rider, whom Aurora recognized as the older man from their previous encounter, nudged his horse a few paces forward. "Mr. Blackwood sends his compliments, Marshal, and a message for the lady." Aurora felt a chill run through her. How did Blackwood even know of her existence? "What lady?" Vaughn replied, his tone neutral. The man smiled thinly. "The one you've been escorting to Santa Fe. Miss Aurora Anderson, if I'm not mistaken." Vaughn's expression betrayed nothing, but Aurora could sense his surprise and concern. "And what's Blackwood's interest in Miss Anderson?" "That's between him and the lady," the man replied. "But he's asked us to deliver a message and an offer." Against Vaughn's warning glance, Aurora stepped forward to stand beside him. "I'm Aurora Anderson," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I've never met Mr. Blackwood, nor do I have any business with him." The man chuckled. "Oh, but you do, miss. You see, your fiancé, Mr. Harold Billington, works for Mr. Blackwood now, and he's been, let's say, less than forthcoming about certain financial arrangements." Aurora felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Harold works for Blackwood. That's impossible. He's a banker with the Territorial Bank." "Was a banker," the man corrected. "Until he lost a significant sum of the bank's money gambling, and Mr. Blackwood kindly offered to cover his debts for a price. That price being Mr. Billington's expertise in certain financial matters." Vaughn's hand settled at the small of Aurora's back, a steadying presence as she struggled to process this information. "What's the message?" he demanded. "Simple," the man replied. "Mr. Blackwood suggests that Miss Anderson might want to reconsider her wedding plans. Mr. Billington's financial situation is precarious, and his new employment comes with certain risks." "Is that a threat?" Vaughn's voice had hardened to steel. "Just friendly advice," the man said with a shrug. "Mr. Blackwood also extends an offer of employment to Miss Anderson. He's heard she recently sold a valuable ranch property and might have business acumen of her own to contribute." Aurora felt sick. The ranch had been in her family for generations. The idea that Blackwood knew of its sale, that he might be keeping tabs on her through Harold. "You can tell Mr. Blackwood that I decline his offer," she said coldly, "and that my personal affairs are none of his concern." The man sighed, as if disappointed. "Mr. Blackwood thought you might say that. He asked me to add that should you change your mind, you can find him at the Palace Hotel in Santa Fe. He'll be attending your wedding as Mr. Billington's new employer." With that parting shot, he tipped his hat, signaled to his companions, and they wheeled their horses around, riding back the way they had come. As soon as they were out of sight, Aurora's legs gave way beneath her. Vaughn caught her before she could fall, guiding her to sit on a nearby boulder. "Breathe," he instructed gently. "Just breathe." Aurora struggled to control her racing thoughts. Harold gambling, working for Blackwood, it can't be true. "People can surprise you," Vaughn said, his voice carefully neutral, "not always in good ways. But why would Blackwood care about me?" "About our wedding," Vaughn frowned, considering. "Your ranch. You said you sold it recently." "Yes, after my parents died. It wasn't large, but the land was good. Water rights, timber, and who bought it?" Aurora tried to remember the details of the transaction, which had been handled largely by Harold and the bank. A company called Western Development Corporation. Harold said they were investing in properties throughout the territory. Vaughn's expression darkened. "Western Development is one of Blackwood's fronts. He's been buying up land all over the territory, often using pressure tactics to force sales at below market value." The implications sank in slowly. "Are you saying Harold helped Blackwood acquire my family's ranch? That he deliberately undervalued it?" "I'm saying it's a possibility worth considering," Vaughn replied carefully. "Especially given what we just learned about Harold's employment situation." Aurora stood abruptly, anger replacing shock. "We need to get to Santa Fe." "I need to speak with Harold directly." Vaughn nodded, already moving to prepare the horse. "We'll push hard today. With luck, we can reach the outskirts of Santa Fe by nightfall." They rode in tense silence for hours, Aurora's mind churning with questions and growing suspicions. Everything she thought she knew about Harold, about her future, seemed suddenly uncertain. Had he really gambled away bank funds? Had he deliberately manipulated her into selling her ranch at a loss? And what did Blackwood want with her now? By mid-afternoon, the terrain had changed again, the narrow canyons giving way to rolling hills covered in pinyon pine and juniper. Vaughn pushed their pace, stopping only when absolutely necessary to rest the horse. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, he pointed to a distant smudge on the landscape. "Santa Fe," he said. "We might make it by dark after all." Aurora felt a surge of conflicting emotions, relief that their journey was nearly over, apprehension about what awaited her in the city, and a strange reluctance to see this time with Vaughn come to an end. "Vaughn," she said hesitantly, "thank you for everything. Not just for getting me to Santa Fe, but for showing me things about myself I might never have discovered otherwise." He glanced at her, his gray eyes softening. "You were always capable, Aurora. You just needed the chance to prove it to yourself most of all." They rode on as the landscape was painted in the golden hues of sunset. Aurora found herself memorizing the feel of Vaughn's arms around her, the rhythm of the horse beneath them, the wild beauty of the territory that had become more home to her in a few days than Tucson had been in years. As twilight deepened into dusk, the lights of Santa Fe appeared before them, a constellation of earthbound stars spread across the valley. Vaughn guided his horse toward the outskirts of the city, where a small inn stood welcoming with warm, glowing windows. "We'll stop here for the night," he decided. "Enter the city properly in the morning." The inn was simple but clean, catering primarily to travelers and traders rather than the city's more affluent visitors. The proprietor, a cheerful woman of Mexican descent, provided them with separate rooms and a hot meal that they ate mostly in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As they prepared to retire for the night, Vaughn hesitated in the hallway between their rooms. "Aurora," he said, his voice low. "Whatever you decide tomorrow, know that you have choices, more than you might think." She looked up at him, studying the face that had become so familiar in such a short time, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his temple, the gray eyes that could shift from steel to smoke depending on his mood. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to express the tumult of emotions his words stirred in her. He nodded once, then turned toward his room. "Good night, Aurora." "Good night, Vaughn." Alone in her room, Aurora sat by the window, gazing out at the lights of Santa Fe. Somewhere in that city was Harold, the man she had promised to marry. A man who, if Blackwood's messengers were to be believed, had deceived her in ways she was only beginning to understand. And somewhere in that same city was Blackwood himself, a man she had never met, but who seemed to have insinuated himself into her life through Harold. What did he want with her? What was the true nature of his business with Harold? As the night deepened around her, Aurora found her thoughts returning again and again to Vaughn, to the way he had lifted her onto his saddle that first day, to the trust he had shown in her during their journey, to the unspoken connection that had grown between them with each passing day. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a different future than the one she had planned. Not the safe, respectable life as Mrs. Harold Billington, but something wilder, less predictable. A life where she might face challenges head-on rather than seeking to avoid them, where she might be valued for her strength rather than her compliance. A life, perhaps, with a man who had already seen her at her most vulnerable and her most capable, and had admired her for both. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the thin curtains of her room. Aurora dressed carefully in her last clean outfit, a simple green traveling dress that had remarkably few wrinkles considering it had been packed in her carpet bag for days. Vaughn was already waiting in the inn's small dining room, his expression thoughtful as he nursed a cup of coffee. He stood when she entered, and she was struck again by the natural courtesy that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "You sleep well?" he asked as she joined him at the table. "Hardly at all," she admitted. "Too much on my mind." He nodded in understanding. "Have you decided what you'll do?" Aurora took a deep breath. "I need to speak with Harold, to hear his side of this story before I make any decisions." "That's fair," Vaughn agreed, though she thought she detected a hint of disappointment in his eyes. "I'll escort you to wherever he's staying." "The Plaza Hotel, according to his last letter," Aurora said. "It's where we're to be married tomorrow." They finished their breakfast quickly, then set out for the center of Santa Fe. The city was already bustling with activity despite the early hour, a vibrant mix of cultures evident in the architecture, the goods being sold in the market, and the languages being spoken all around them. Under different circumstances, Aurora might have been charmed by the city's lively atmosphere. As it was, she barely registered their surroundings, her mind focused entirely on the confrontation that lay ahead. The Plaza Hotel stood on one side of the city's central square, an imposing three-story building of adobe and wood that catered to Santa Fe's wealthier visitors. As they approached, Aurora felt her resolve wavering. What if Harold denied everything? What if he had a perfectly reasonable explanation for his association with Blackwood? Vaughn seemed to sense her uncertainty. "I'll be right beside you," he assured her quietly. "Whatever happens." His words steadied her, and she nodded gratefully before entering the hotel's elegant lobby. At the front desk, she inquired after Harold Billington. "Mr. Billington is in the dining room taking breakfast," the clerk informed her, his eyes widening slightly as he noted her travel-worn appearance. "Shall I announce you, Miss Anderson, Aurora Anderson, and no, thank you. I'll find him myself." The dining room was half full, mostly with well-dressed businessmen discussing the day's affairs over coffee and eggs. Aurora scanned the tables, her heart pounding in her chest, until she spotted a familiar figure seated near the windows. Harold Billington looked much as she remembered, slender, fastidiously dressed, his brown hair neatly combed and his mustache precisely trimmed. What she hadn't expected was the company he was keeping. Seated across from him was an older man, expensively attired, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to power and its exercise. As if sensing her presence, Harold looked up, his expression shifting rapidly from surprise to alarm as he spotted her standing in the doorway with Vaughn at her side. "Aurora," he exclaimed, rising hastily. "What are you? I wasn't expecting you until later today. And who is this gentleman?" "Hello, Harold," Aurora replied, her voice remarkably steady despite the emotion churning within her. "This is U.S. Marshal Vaughn Lockhart. He was kind enough to escort me when I was denied passage on the Stagecoach." Harold's gaze flicked nervously between Aurora and Vaughn, then to his breakfast companion, who was observing the scene with apparent amusement. "I see," Harold said, regaining some of his composure. "Well, I'm grateful to the Marshal for ensuring your safe arrival. But as you can see, I'm in the middle of an important business meeting. Perhaps we could speak later. I've arranged a suite for you where you can rest and refresh yourself before the wedding." "I think we need to speak now," Aurora insisted, stepping closer to the table. "About your business and about our future." The older man at the table chuckled, drawing her attention. "You must be the bride," he said, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. "I've heard so much about you, Miss Anderson. James Blackwood at your service." So this was Blackwood. Aurora studied him, noting the cold calculation in his eyes despite his genial expression. "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged stiffly. "I understand you've taken a particular interest in my wedding and in my former property." Blackwood's eyebrows rose slightly, while Harold's face drained of color. "Aurora, I don't know what you've heard, but I can explain. Perhaps this conversation would be better continued in private," Blackwood suggested, gesturing to the other diners who were beginning to take notice of the tension at their table. "I think that's an excellent idea," Vaughn agreed, speaking for the first time. His hand settled lightly at the small of Aurora's back, a gesture of support that did not go unnoticed by either Harold or Blackwood. They relocated to a small private parlor off the main lobby, where Blackwood ordered coffee with the casual authority of a man who considered the entire hotel his domain. Once they were seated, Aurora and Vaughn on one settee, Harold and Blackwood on another, the tension in the room was palpable. "I believe Miss Anderson has some questions for you, Billington," Vaughn prompted when Harold remained silent, fidgeting with his watch chain. Harold cleared his throat. "Aurora, I don't know what this Marshal has told you, but I assure you everything I've done has been with our future in mind." "Including gambling away bank funds?" Aurora asked directly. "Including helping Blackwood acquire my family's ranch at below market value." Harold's face contorted briefly before he regained control. "Business is complicated, Aurora. There are aspects you wouldn't understand. Try me," she interrupted, her voice hard. "Explain to me how deceiving me serves our future." Harold looked to Blackwood, who merely shrugged, clearly enjoying the drama unfolding before him. Left to his own devices, Harold attempted to rally. Very well. Yes, I had some. Financial difficulties. Investments that didn't pan out as expected. Mr. Blackwood generously offered to help resolve those issues in exchange for my expertise in banking matters. And my ranch, Aurora pressed. Was that part of your arrangement too? Harold had the grace to look ashamed. The ranch was an opportunity. Western Development was interested in expanding their holdings in that area. The timing seemed fortuitous. Fortuitous, Aurora repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. You deliberately undervalued my family's land that had been in my family for generations to curry favor with your new employer. It wasn't like that, Harold protested weakly. I was trying to secure our future, Aurora. Mr. Blackwood has offered me a position with significant potential for advancement. We'll have a good life together. Aurora stared at him, truly seeing him perhaps for the first time. The man she had agreed to marry was not the honorable, stable provider she had believed him to be, but a weak-willed opportunist who had betrayed her trust for his own gain. There is no we, Harold, she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. I will not marry a man who has lied to me, who has used me to further his own ambitions. Harold's expression hardened. Don't be hasty, Aurora. You have no prospects here, no family, no connections. Where will you go? What will you do? That's no longer your concern, Vaughn interjected, his tone making it clear the discussion on that point was closed. Blackwood, who had been observing the exchange with evident enjoyment, finally spoke. If I may interject, Miss Anderson, my offer of employment stands. A woman of your resourcefulness would be an asset to my organization. Aurora turned her gaze to him, seeing clearly the predatory gleam in his eyes. Mr. Blackwood, I wouldn't work for you if you were the last employer in the territory, and I suggest you look carefully at your new banking associate. A man who would betray his fiancée might just as easily betray his business partners. Blackwood's amused expression faltered slightly, his eyes narrowing as he reassessed her. A pity, he said after a moment. I think we might have worked well together. I doubt that very much, Aurora replied, rising from her seat. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a wedding to cancel and a future to reconsider. Vaughn stood with her, his presence solid and reassuring at her side. Harold made one last attempt to salvage the situation. Aurora, please be reasonable. Where will you go? What will you live on? She paused at the door, looking back at the man she had once thought would be her husband. I'll manage, Harold. I'm stronger than you ever gave me credit for. With that, she left the room, Vaughn following close behind. In the lobby, she stopped, suddenly uncertain despite her brave words. Where would she go? What would she do? Her plans had revolved around this marriage for so long that she felt adrift without it. Aurora, Vaughn said gently, drawing her attention. Are you all right? She looked up at him, at the concern in his gray eyes, and found herself smiling despite everything. Strangely, yes, I feel liberated. As if I've been carrying a weight I didn't even recognize until it was gone. He returned her smile, the expression warming his usually serious features. What will you do now? I don't know, she admitted. Return to Tucson, perhaps, though there's nothing left for me there either. Vaughn hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. I have a proposition for you, not like Blackwood's, he added hastily. Something honest. I'm listening, Aurora said, curious despite herself. I own land north of here. Good land with a small cabin and a creek running through it. I bought it years ago thinking someday I might, well, settle down, build something. Aurora's heart began to beat faster. And it's been sitting empty all this time while I ride the territory enforcing the law. But lately, I've been thinking it might be time for a change. He met her eyes directly. The Marshal Service has offered me a more permanent position here in Santa Fe. Less traveling, more administrative work. "You'd give up the trail?" Aurora asked, surprised. "I thought it was your home." "It was," he agreed. "For a long time, but a man can't live on the trail forever. Eventually, he starts wanting something more, permanent roots, a real home." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. "Vaughn," Aurora began, uncertain how to respond to what seemed to be an offer of. "What exactly? Employment? Partnership? Something more?" "I'm not proposing marriage, Aurora," he clarified, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Not yet, anyway. We've known each other less than a week. But I am offering you a place to stay while you figure out your next steps. The cabin needs work and the land needs tending. If you're interested, I could use a partner in the venture." "A business arrangement?" she asked, wanting to be clear. "For now," he confirmed, "with the possibility of reassessing the arrangement as we get to know each other better. In a proper, respectable way," he added with a small smile. Aurora considered his offer. It wasn't what she had expected when she'd set out from Tucson days ago. But then nothing about this journey had gone as expected. And the idea of working the land, of building something from the ground up with a man she had come to respect and admire, held a certain appeal that her planned life with Harold never had. "I accept," she said finally, her decision feeling right in a way her engagement to Harold never truly had. "On a trial basis, of course." "Of course," Vaughn agreed, relief and pleasure evident in his expression. "And your first duty as my business partner will be to help me retrieve your trunk from the Stagecoach office. I believe it should have arrived by now." Aurora laughed, the sound light and free in a way she hadn't felt in years. "Lead the way, Marshal Lockhart." As they walked together into the bright Santa Fe morning, Aurora found herself thinking of that moment days ago when she'd stood outside the Tucson Stagecoach station, desperate and alone. How strange and wonderful that being denied passage had led her not to a marriage built on lies, but to an opportunity for something genuine and true. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time in a long while, it was also full of possibility. And as Vaughn's hand brushed against hers, just briefly, in a gesture that might have been accidental but felt intentional, Aurora knew she had made the right choice. 6 months later, Aurora stood on the porch of the cabin that had become her home, watching as Vaughn rode up the winding path from the main road. The land around her had transformed in those months, fences mended, garden planted and harvested, a small orchard of apple trees set out in neat rows that would bear fruit in years to come. The cabin, too, had changed, with new curtains at the windows, a fresh coat of whitewash on the walls, and furniture they had either built together or purchased on occasional trips into Santa Fe. It was still a simple place, but it was theirs, or rather, it was a place they shared, in the careful arrangement they had established. Vaughn lived in town during the week, carrying out his duties at the marshal's office, while Aurora stayed at the homestead, managing the day-to-day operations. Weekends found them working side by side, Vaughn teaching Aurora about animal husbandry and carpentry, while she introduced innovations in the garden and kept meticulous records of their progress. It was a business arrangement, just as they had agreed. Except for the way her heart quickened when she saw him riding home on Friday evenings. Except for the way their conversations stretched late into the night, sharing hopes and memories and dreams. Except for the moments when their hands would touch over dinner, or while passing tools and linger just a moment longer than necessary. They had been careful, respectable. Vaughn slept in the small bunkhouse they had built adjacent to the main cabin. They attended church together in town, where they were known simply as business partners, the marshal and the woman who managed his land. If people speculated about more, They were discreet enough to keep such thoughts to themselves, at least in Aurora's hearing. But something had shifted in recent weeks. A tension, a sweetness in the air between them, conversations that paused and resumed with new meaning, glances that held and conveyed what words had not yet expressed. And now, as Vaughn dismounted and secured his horse, Aurora knew that today would be different. She had seen it in his letter, which had arrived unexpectedly midweek, asking if he might come home early on Thursday rather than Friday. There was something he wished to discuss, he had written. Something important. "You're early," she called as he approached, trying for lightness despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Couldn't wait," he replied, smiling up at her. He looked different somehow, his usual practical attire replaced by a clean white shirt and newer trousers, his dark hair freshly trimmed. He climbed the steps to join her on the porch, and Aurora was struck again by how natural his presence felt here, how right. This was no longer just his land that she happened to manage. It was their home, created through shared labor and care. "I have news," he said, gesturing toward the chairs they often sat in during evening hours, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "Good news, I hope?" Aurora asked, settling into her usual seat. "I think so." He remained standing, unusually restless. "The Marshal Service has offered me a promotion, Chief Marshal for the Northern District of the Territory." "Vaughn, that's wonderful," Aurora exclaimed sincerely. "You've earned it many times over." "It would mean more responsibility," he continued. "More administrative work, less time in the field, but also more stability, better pay." Aurora nodded, understanding the implications. "You're considering accepting, then?" "I am." He finally sat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, looking at her intently. "But it would change things here. I'd need to be in Santa Fe more consistently. Might not make it home every weekend." Home. The word hung between them, laden with meaning. This place had become home to them both, in ways neither had fully anticipated 6 months ago. "We would manage," Aurora assured him. "The homestead is running smoothly now. I can handle most things on my own, and we could hire extra help for the heavier work." Vaughn nodded, but his expression remained serious. "There's another option I've been considering." "Oh." Aurora tried to keep her voice steady, though her heart had begun to race. "Yes." He stood again, moving to the porch railing and looking out over the land they had cultivated together. "I've been thinking about our arrangement, Aurora, about how well we work together, how much we've accomplished in a short time." "It has been remarkably successful," she agreed cautiously. He turned to face her, his gray eyes intent. "It's more than that, at least for me it is." Aurora held her breath, scarcely daring to hope he meant what she thought he might. "Aurora Anderson," he said, his voice dropping to that low, gentle tone that always sent a shiver through her. "These past 6 months have been the happiest of my life. Not because of the land or the cabin or any material thing, because of you, because of who you are and who I am when I'm with you." He moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "I know we agreed to a business arrangement, and if that's all you want, I'll respect that. But I can't go on pretending that my feelings for you are merely those of a business partner or even a friend." Aurora's eyes filled with tears, her heart so full she could barely speak. "Vaughn." "I love you, Aurora," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since that day outside the Stagecoach station, when you stood there in the dust, refusing to be defeated by circumstance. I've watched you build a new life here, with courage and determination and grace. And I want, more than anything, to share that life with you. Not as partners in business, but as partners in everything." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple but beautiful ring, a single pearl nestled in a setting of silver leaves. "Aurora Anderson, will you marry me?" Will you be my wife, my partner, my home?" Aurora looked from the ring to his face, seeing in his eyes all the love and respect and admiration she had ever hoped to find in a life companion. This was what had been missing with Harold, this sense of being truly seen and valued for exactly who she was. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Vaughn Lockhart, I will marry you." His face broke into a smile of such joy that it transformed him completely. Rising, he slipped the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face in his hands. "May I kiss you, Aurora? I've been wanting to for a very long time." In answer, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as months of restrained emotion found release. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while her hands rested against his chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally parted, both breathless, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. "I've been dreaming of that since the night we danced in Eagle's Rest," he admitted. Aurora smiled, remembering. "I think I began falling in love with you that night, though I wasn't ready to admit it then." "And now?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "Now I can say it freely," she replied. "I love you, Vaughn Lockhart, not for your protection or your property, but for your heart, for the man you are." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Santa Fe, with Martha and Elijah Turner making the journey from Eagle's Rest to witness the ceremony. Vaughn's new position as chief marshal brought them respect in the community, while Aurora's management of their growing homestead earned her a reputation as a shrewd businesswoman in her own right. Over the years, their partnership flourished, both in love and in enterprise. The homestead expanded to include cattle and horses, with Aurora developing a particularly successful line in breeding quality trail horses that were sought after throughout the territory. Vaughn's work brought stability to the region, his fair-minded approach to law enforcement earning him the respect of settlers and native peoples alike. They were blessed with children, first a daughter with Vaughn's serious gray eyes and Aurora's auburn hair, then twin boys who inherited their father's height and their mother's determination. The cabin grew into a proper ranch house, with rooms added as the family expanded and the business prospered. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work was done, Aurora and Vaughn would often sit together on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Sometimes they would speak of that fateful day outside the Tucson Stagecoach station, marveling at how a moment of apparent misfortune had led them to their greatest happiness. "You ever regret it?" Vaughn asked once, on the 10th anniversary of their meeting. "The journey we took, the hardships along the way." Aurora looked at him, at the face she had come to know better than her own, lined now with a decade of shared joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. She thought of the life they had built together, of the love that had grown stronger with each passing year. "Not for a moment," she replied, taking his hand in hers. "Every step of that journey led me exactly where I was meant to be, home with you." And as the stars appeared one by one in the vast sky above them, Aurora knew with absolute certainty that being denied passage on that stagecoach had been the greatest stroke of fortune in her life. For it had led her not to a marriage of convenience with a man who saw only what he wanted to see, but to a true partnership with a man who had lifted her onto his saddle and into a life beyond her wildest dreams.